Hi, my name is Lottie, I'm 26 and I have autism and anxiety. Lately I've been trying to learn about myself through the lens of autism and understand how it affects me and other people around me. While I don't speak for everyone on the spectrum or with a mental health condition, I would like to use this channel to give some insight into how those conditions affect day-to-day life. I'd like to use this video specifically to explain how autism affects me through outlining the areas associated with autism. Obviously, I'm still learning what my autism means to me, as I was only diagnosed in May this year, but I was diagnosed with anxiety as a teenager, so I'm no stranger to the mental health community. Despite that, I've often struggled in my life with imposter syndrome, specifically in my university studies, but also with my mental health. Generally feeling like my depression isn't valid, or feeling like my anxiety is just a cry for attention. So this year when I got my diagnosis for autism, I was like, yes, great! Finally, an explanation for why I feel like I don't fit in the world. And then I started meeting people on the spectrum and researching it, and I suddenly went again, oh no, I'm faking it, I'm just a big fakey faker. But thankfully I was able to go on a course run by a charity in my city called Number 6, who work as a hub for activities for autistic people, and ran this course about what autism is, the history of it, and how it affects everybody differently. Through this course, I started to understand all the different aspects of autism and why it was so important to understand what it means to me. So while the autism spectrum affects many areas, including socialization and behavior, I've found that this comic strip best highlights the key areas of autism, and I'll be using it to explain, and I'll link the full comic strip in the description. So, autism affects 5 key areas. As you can see, the primary areas affected by autism are language, motor skills, perception, executive function, and sensory filtering. Language and motor skills are difficult for me to explain under the umbrella of autism, because I was actually diagnosed with dyspraxia at university and the two conditions massively overlap. But in general, I'm quite clumsy, I struggle with fine motor skills, I struggle with language at times, and I tend to do that annoying thing where somebody will say something to me and I'll go, what? And then before they can explain to me again, I've gone, oh no, I've worked out what you just said, it's fine. Sensory filtering, however, is the one that makes me feel the most autistic. It's the thing that makes me most feel like I can't cope with the world. I find it correlates most with my stress levels, but in general, my senses just become overstimulated and overwhelmed, and I can't cope with things around me. For example, my biggest issue is with loud or intrusive sounds. So say I'm out and an ambulance goes past, or I walk into a noisy building, and the sound is like a physical wall that attacks my body and makes me feel unsafe and overwhelmed. Generally, when this happens, my hands go over my ears, my head goes down, and I go into sort of a standing fetal position, and I need rescuing. When I go out alone, I find it's incredibly difficult to self-soothe and remove myself from the situation, and so I tend to go into a bit of a meltdown, which means I don't actually go out very often alone. I'm mostly housebound. I do, however, have an amazing support system in my boyfriend Sandy, and my mum and my brothers, who do endeavour to make sure I go outside alone at least once a week. Meltdowns, by the way, to me kind of look like panic attacks, but I'm not sure if that's because I've always had the meltdowns and assumed they were panic attacks, or they're so similar to panic attacks that I equate the two as the same thing, but it generally involves a lot of hyperventilating, assuming I'm gonna die, and generally freaking out, freezing up, and not being able to cope with the situation. I also suffer from other sensory issues. For example, visual stuff. If there's too many visual things in a room, I get overwhelmed, and I can't process things as easily. Or I get really strange feelings in my skin. For example, if I am overwhelmed and somebody tries to comfort me, they tend to rub my arms or rub on my back, and the physical feeling of somebody's skin on my skin feels like a burning pain, and I quite often quite irritably tell people to stop, and I've had people in the past get quite offended that they're only trying to comfort me, and I have this violent reaction to it because it's causing me so much pain. I do also, like many autistics, prefer to be comfortable in my clothes. I don't quite have the same reaction to labels in the back. I don't feel the need to cut them out, but I do live primarily in my jammies. That's just what makes me most comfortable. Now, perception. Perception, I think, is best summarised by explaining the act of masking. Masking is where you cover your natural behaviours or you mimic the behaviours of others. To me, masking summarises the issues I have with perception because I spend so much of my time muddling through what other people's perception of me is and how I want them to perceive me. In my own mind, I feel that people perceive me as annoying or as burdensome, and that causes me a lot of stress and anxiety. So I spend a lot of my time masking. So when I have conversations, I dedicate a lot of my brain power to working out what kind of personality I should be presenting to the person, as well as what responses they're expecting of me. Masking actually causes me, and I think it's quite common to cause problems with identity, because I have done it for so long that I don't know how much of it is me, what parts of my personality that I present are real and genuine, what opinions I have that are my own, and just really who I really am. Not much more I can really say on the subject of perspective and masking, because it is a massive source of anxiety for me to wonder what people think about me every second of my interactions, and even now I'm finding it is quite an overwhelming subject for me to talk about. Executive function is another tricky one, but I haven't got to the point where I really understand what it means to me. I've read bits and pieces online about it being how my brain works differently to the neurotypical brain. I've also heard claims that it is about how the pathways and the neuroprocessing works differently in autistic people, and how the physiology and the neurology are actually distinctly different. But to me, it's so far out of my previous understanding of autism that it's not something I'm comfortable to go too deeply into, but I definitely intend to research it further and go into it at a later date. I think that's probably enough explaining for today. Planning this video has been a real learning experience for me, and it's also been a real test of my endurance against my own anxiety. It's been actually quite difficult for me to film this and be able to communicate these issues quite so openly, but I think that's part of why it's so important for me to be able to express myself in this way. I also think it's important to be able to represent and give insight into how these issues affect an adult in day-to-day life, because a lot of the coverage online is about children and the teenage experience of autism. There are obviously way more aspects to autism, and I'd like to make more videos that cover things like stimming, which you've probably seen me do a little bit through the video, meltdowns and fixed interests, which are always quite interesting. But I'd also like to make some more general content, just showcasing how I deal with day-to-day life and how I understand the world around me. So until then, thank you for watching and have a really great day. Bye!